Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to yet another edition of the Pure Digital Podcast, Pure Digital Passion Podcast with me, Moses Kamibaro. My guest today is Rishi Kohli. He's the founder and CEO of Fika Mobility. This is a company that's pioneering the electrification of the Boda Boda industry, which, as we know, has about 2.2 million Boda Bodas on the road. Boda Bodas, for those who are not familiar with them, are what we call passenger motorcycles that are used to move passengers back and forth and also do the delivery of goods and services. And more importantly, Rishi is a pioneer. He's got a Kenyan background. He's somebody that I met recently at the GA Insurance launch of the Eco Drive insurance policy, the first policy of its kind in Kenya that offers EV operators and those who own EV vehicles the opportunity to insure it in a secure and practical way. Thank you very much for joining us, Rishi.
Thanks, Moses. Thanks for having me here. Very excited to be here. Actually.
Likewise. And thank you for agreeing to be on this in less than a week since I met you. So I'm glad that we got this
I
opportunity.
had to make it happen.
Okay. So, Rishi, I'm a bit of an enthusiast or a bit of a fanboy about all things EV and electrification. I think it's the greatest opportunity in a long time for Africa, given the fact that, for instance, in Kenya, renewables power most of our electricity. So I think it's a perfect fit from that perspective. And of course, last week we saw the launch of this new policy where we met, and you're also on a really good panel telling us everything about all things EV in this country. But I'd like to start from origins. I'd like to find out a little bit more about you, Rishi, your background, your professional experiences, and just give us a quick summary of, who is Rishi?
Well, thanks. I'm actually called Rishi Kohli, but to make it easier, my name is Rishi. I'm born and raised in Kenya. I studied here, schooled here up until university. Went off to university. I come from an entrepreneurial background. My late father was an entrepreneur. My mother was an entrepreneur as well here. So I guess it's in the DNA. When I went off to the UK, I started a career in pension review after university,
Okay.
which was the mis-selling of pensions. And then I went into different roles after I actually lost my job
Oh, wow.
in the pension review sector, into like supporting minority businesses for the second largest chamber of commerce in the UK. I actually wrote a bid or co-wrote the bid and helped get minorities more included in the Chamber of Commerce, and then moved on to a similar role, which was funded by the London Development Authority, the Mayor of London at the time, Ken Livingstone. And then I moved to the UAE, and my brother, myself, my father, we formed a business where we were distributing circuit board machinery without chemical etching for a German-listed PLC. That was highly successful. Primarily driven by my brother. That was something he wanted to do. So, I joined the business. Probably about a year later, my wife and I moved from the UK. I sort of convinced her it's a 3-year stint, and she had the very open boldness to tell me on the plane that you don't move for a business for 3 years, Rishi. It's a long-term thing.
Yeah.
We then moved into LED lighting, and were very successful and still are across the Middle East and also in Kenya. We've done several projects around here, a lot of the 5-star hotels, a lot of the large developments. And another passionate business that, again, my brother and I founded was we wash cars in the UAE without water. So for every car we wash, we save a ton of water with our 500 ml solution. We've been doing it nearly 14 years. It's been highly successful. And was always back and forth for the lighting business in Kenya. And then I decided to get into Fika as my next baby or my next entrepreneurial, you could say, journey. And here we are with Fika. And Fika, as you know, in Swahili means to arrive or have arrived. Yeah.
So tell us about the origins and shall I call it the spark, to use the right term, that got Fika going. Where did this come from?
I like that, Moses. I like the idea that you put in spark. So when I used to come back to Kenya for, you could just say holidays, but primarily for business, for the lighting business. As you know, traffic was pretty horrendous back in the day. Up until a few years ago, it's kind of eased up, of course, with the express highway and, of course, new trunk roads being built through key residential areas, which I think is, was much needed. We've all had a Boda guy, right? A guy we kind of, pick up the phone and ring. And mine was Patrick. So Patrick used to come over, and I used to jump on the back of his bike, put the helmet on, the reflector on, and off we used to shoot something we shoot down to a meeting, something that used to take 45 minutes in a car would probably take you 20 minutes, 15 minutes. And one day Patrick comes over and he goes, "Sir, Mr. Rishi." I'm like, "Yes, Patrick, can I borrow $150 or 15,000 shillings?" And I said, "Yeah, what do you need it for?" And I'd known Patrick for about 3 years, very reliable person,
Mm,
would go and do our errands and
yeah.
pick up, you know,
There's a
things for
relationship
us. There was a
there.
very deep level of trust with him. He wasn't part of the company, but he may as well have been part of. He was part of the ethos in which we believed, which is a lot around trust and honesty and all that. And I said, "What do you need it for?" He said, "I want to buy a motorbike." And I looked at his face and I said, "Patrick, you're going to buy a motorbike for $150? What rubbish motorbike you buying?" He said, "No, sir, the model works on, I'm going to put 15,000, or at the time was 100 to the shilling.
Mm,
We wish it was there now. Would put $150, 15,000 shillings down with a microfinance company. And I'd buy this bike and I'd pay them X amount per day at the end of the week. So a week is calculated per day, but a weekly um, rate. And within 18 months, on a, you could say, lease to own model, I'll own the bike." And I said, "Oh, okay, fine." And being the entrepreneur I am,
hmm
although I'm not a super numbers guy, I went into sort of some deep dive with him and I said, "So if you're paying this per week, and then you've got, what are your other costs?" And he said, "Fuel and then maintenance of the bike." And I
Mm.
said, "But how much you actually earning?" And he said, "This." So he was making some money, decent money, but it's a tough job being a bottle rider. It's really, really demanding. They're out there for 10, 12 hours a day. Excuse my language, but it's dog eat dog. In those days, there was no fulfillment apps that you just, pick a ride from Uber or Bolt or
So just
Google,
hanging out on the street
and you're
corners and
waiting.
stuff.
And hence they had, the way we have the Boda guy, they had their
Mm.
Boda customers, they had their reliable customers like us. And, I looked at this and I said, "So your biggest cost here is actually fuel and microfinance. There's not much we can do about microfinance because banks weren't really financing, or even now they're getting into it, financing Boda Bodas because it was
Yeah.
too risky an asset for them." So, you know, did the maths with him. And that's where this love of understanding EVs came from. So I went around the whole of Asia, right away from China to Taiwan to Singapore to Indonesia, even if I was there on holiday or something, and just would start looking at what are the metrics, and India particularly, because a lot of our Boda Boda bikes come from two of the largest Indian brands. And I
Mm.
realized that none of them have an EV at the time. You're going back about three and a half years ago. And yeah, off we went. And, I was about to bring in a whole load of motorbikes and tuk-tuks, which are EV, then realized that, this is not quite simple as that. We need to really understand the battery technology, the charging infrastructure and all that. So I brought in two POCs around March 2020. The timing
Okay.
was not quite the best, but it worked for us because we did a lot of A/B testing. We put these bikes out with border riders. Patrick, unfortunately, was really going to suffer, was suffering within the COVID
The
times in
time
that time, and he
exactly.
did a lot of testing for us. Getting technical, we had a hub motor where the motor of the motorbike sits on the rear wheel. But our primary thing was to test the battery technology. Are we going to get range? What is the speed we're getting? What happens with load capacity?
I mean, it's basic durability, right?
And then, we did some partner testing with the likes of Mcopa, who did a feasibility study, I think, with 30 odd riders. They came back and said, "Look, you need to move away from a hub motor." And we had already realized that. And so
Mm.
we started designing a mid-drive vehicle or motorbike. And by 2021, we had 24, 25 bikes into Kenya. We sold 3. And then the rest, we created a program called e-mobility as a service.
Okay.
And we
Okay.
did, and we put it into 2 buckets under EMAS, which is what I call double BAS, bike as a service and battery as a service.
Aha.
And what we did around that is we leased the bike to corporates and we leased the battery. And the reason we did that is because we weren't going to recover the battery costs or the additional batteries cost. So our motorbikes, and I haven't mentioned this actually, the EV motorbikes are swappable batteries. So you can't really lease to Moses in his company and say, "Here's 2 bikes, 4 batteries, but I'm now going to charge you power for batteries," because you're like, "Well, hang on, I'm using my own power and my own infrastructure. So why am I
Ah.
doing that?" So to bring in revenue on the battery, which is a large cost and proponent of the cost of the bike, we started leasing the batteries. And, we ran that for about 22, 24 months, been highly successful in it. And around this time last year, we redesigned the frame. We made it into a larger bike, kept the EV components the same. So the mid-drive motor, the battery, the controller. And we knew that ICE bikes have a regulatory mandate to comply with local content, which means like things like the seat carrier, sorry, the seat rear carrier, side stand, center stand, rear carriers,
Mm.
front bull bar. They all need knee guard actually.
Mm.
All need to be local content. So we started investing into that with some partners here, and we basically redesigned, rebuilt the bike. So bringing in just the chassis frame and the EV side, all locally with local content. And we then have now, in the last 3 months, 4 months, actually, we've sold to corporates a little earlier on of the new
Yeah.
model, version 2.0, as they call it in the office. And we also now sell through microfinance companies.
Okay.
And so we sell the bike and we lease the battery. And the reason we do that is we do have a few small swap points or battery swapping points for border riders, but it also gives the convenience for border riders to have the battery charged in their downtime anywhere they are, because we give them the little charging adapter with it,
Okay. So,
and they can do that. And that gives them that flexibility. And, to date, we've already got about, in a handful of literally 6 weeks, we've already got about 15 to 18 border riders who've snapped this up very quickly through microfinance, happily paying the microfinance company, but also at the same time paying their battery lease. Our batteries are fully IoT, BMS,
okay.
so we're able to track the battery, understand the performance of the battery. And in any unfortunate circumstance, if the border rider is not paying the microfinance or us, we're able to disarm the battery and then
Mm.
have a dialogue. We don't just go and do that, because everyone has a reason as to why they can't pay something. So
I
I
know.
divulged a bit, but I thought I'll give you the full metric
Yeah.
as to.
There's something you said earlier that I want to sort of come back to. You said something about, moving from the hub to
Mm.
the whatever, and that you had to design the bike. Maybe you can go a little bit more into that.
So hub motor, literally, you sit with the motor sits on the rear wheel, and it does have a fairly sufficient amount of power, depending on what sort of power torque you have on that. But we found maintenance would be an issue, especially if you have simple things like punches on the rear wheel. It
Mm.
means splitting the motor slightly apart, pulling
Wow.
the wheel out. So
Okay.
there's a lot of inconvenience around that. We also felt that border riders and wanted a bike that pretty much depicts the power equilibrium or balance right the way through the bike, like an ice bike experience, where the
Mm.
motor's in the middle, you've got the chain running into the rear of the wheel, into the rear wheel, and it gives that smooth, full transition power right across the bike, through the middle of the bike as well.
Wow. Okay.
Whereas we found that the hub was just only driving it through the back. And there are challenges with that, when you're climbing hills and you've got a lot of weight at the back, which is what borders have. And our testing wasn't just around Nairobi,
Yeah.
it was around outside of Nairobi. We were in Githurai, we were in Kiambu, we were sending bikes as far as Muranga. One of our technicians lives in Muranga, and we're like, go on the weekend with it, take the bike and get this tested there. And that's, for us, Fika's thinking is, yes, it's important to look at Nairobi, but the reality is the real border market is actually outside of Nairobi. It doesn't sit within just Nairobi and the periphery of Nairobi. It's what happens outside. No disrespect to border riders here in Nairobi, but a lot of that has transitioned now into fulfillment. So they're part of the Glovos and the Ubers and
Yeah.
Jumia and
Delivery
Little
services.
Cabs
Yeah.
and sorry, I'm not trying to plug them. I just think they're all doing a fantastic thing. It's a convenience to our lives
Yes.
in a great way, and that's also shows the involvement that Nairobi and Kenya has gone. But the reality is that's not what's happening outside for border riders. They're still moving children. They're still moving a lot of taking people to
Passengers and
work
goods.
and goods. I mean, I've got pictures of the initial hub doing very well, carrying I think something like 60 kilos of
Wow.
matoke at the back. I think we've got a
That's
frame
massive.
somewhere. Yeah, but so it's been a labor of love, but an evolvement from hub motor to version 1 of a mid drive to a final version 2 now, which will also improve with battery technology as we go on.
Yeah, there's something very interesting you just said about, the border market is much more than Nairobi. I think
Mm,
one of the things that I find sometimes is that we become very myopic about
yes.
what is Nairobi. Nairobi is not Kenya. Like Kenya is very different. In fact, just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Kajiado West, and there's some work I do there with MasterCard Foundation for the EdTech show on TV. And we're talking about, for lack of a better word, the sticks. Yeah, this is Bundus proper. You're somewhere where it's dusty, it's hot. There's no electricity to the schools we're visiting, at least one of them. And yet, somewhere there in the middle of nowhere, as it would seem, borders were going up and down the whole day. They are everywhere. And it felt as remote as it could get, past Magadi. So I think going back to what you're saying is that it's a much bigger addressable market than people realize. It's not just Nairobi.
Absolutely. And I think, like you said, Nairobi does not depict the whole of Kenya at
Yeah.
the end of the day.
Yeah.
We are an important city, not just for Kenya. We, of course, we just not just being the capital, but across Africa we are. But the reality is, especially for borders, and even if you enhanced it to tuk-tuks, for example,
Yes.
it's going to be, again, outside. You don't see a lot of tuk-tuks here. Yes, there's a lot of, you could say, ban prohibition on tuk-tuks within Nairobi and the city centers,
Yes.
which is fine. And tuk-tuks have their reasons for being more successful in Mombasa, maybe cultural reasons for women to get more into a tuk-tuk rather than on the back of a boda, and so on and so forth. But I think there's a lot to consider, and we've always been conscious when we develop any product, not just from Fika, but anything that I've done, is how are you improving the lives of the end user, and
Mm.
what are you changing for them? And if you're just going to focus on creating EV bikes that are just going to be knocking out fulfillment model, you could say, operations,
Yes.
then yes, it's a fairly healthy sector. But the reality, in our opinion, is it's not scalable to go all the way out to to Western. I mean, look at Mombasa. You go to Kilifi and Malindi. I mean, it is borders everywhere.
And tuk-tuks.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
if you actually look at the petrol bike sale numbers, I think that's the easiest way to look at it and say, where were the petrol bike dominant numbers coming from? Yeah,
It's all out there.
yeah.
So coming back again, I think I read somewhere that we're looking at the current market or the current uptake of borders is something like 2.2 million on the ground, if I'm not wrong. So that's massive in terms of addressable market size. And I guess the question from me to you is thinking about Fika. What does Fika bring? You know, it seems to me that you're in a place that seems to be a bit competitive. There seems to be many other EV two-wheeler organizations. But what is it that you bring to this Boda Boda market? And also, what are the things that make Fika different from the others?
Look, I'm a Kenyan. Like I
Okay.
said earlier, I'm born here. I've been on borders for a long time in my life.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm a frequent user or was a frequent user.
Yeah.
Um, I understand. Our Fika team understand, and it's an all Kenyan team, by the way. And we actually have an ex-border rider who's now a technician within the team, understanding what the bike needed, and that's why we went from version 1 to 2, which was simple things like, does it look like a border? Does it do the work of a
Mm.
border? Perception and first impression is always key. You can bring the best bike from anywhere in the world and it'll do the work, but other parts locally available, all our parts are locally available.
Mm.
You're looking at the fenders, or if you want the front bumper, rear bumper, the headlights, the indicators, the brakes, anything you need is all, apart from the EV side, carriers. Everything is locally available in Kenya. There was an activation that the E-Mobility Association of Kenya with, I think it was a company called Oye, went off in Molo and did an EV activation there. And with one of the microfinance partners, Mogo, we had a number of interested riders, talking to Fika. Lo and behold, 4 days later, we had a border rider take a bus all the way from Nakuru into Nairobi, go to the Mogo shop on Mombasa Road, purchase a bike there and then on the spot, qualified, because he knew he qualified already on the weekend, just needed to get his cash together, put his deposit down, and took the bike. And one of the questions our sales team asked this gentleman, this border rider, is, why Fika? There were so many other bikes.
Aha.
And he said, I can buy the parts anywhere. I saw your bike. All these parts are available in Nakuru. yeah, if there's an EV issue, you'll have to support me, which we can. And, he is now sending in inquiries galore from Nakuru. And the fact that this bike was, we were even hesitant, in fact, to first send it to Nakuru because we're like, hang on, we're isolating out of
You may not
Nairobi.
have the support he needs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he actually stayed the night over and spent 3 hours with us understanding the EV side of the bike so
Yeah.
that if he had issues,
Yeah.
and he's become like this little promoter of EV for us in Nakuru. But his biggest thing was, I can buy all the parts locally. It looks exactly like a Boda bike. It's not something, and I'm not, sidelining the other products.
Yeah.
They all
Correct.
have their uniqueness. We all have different models.
Yes.
And I personally think the cake, or we personally think the cake is big enough, not just in Kenya,
Yes.
but right across Africa, right? So
Yes.
there is enough space for everybody to succeed. But our ethos has always been is, what problem are we solving? And of course, that is obviously the fuel saving, the maintenance saving. And Bodas are walking away at the end of this year, once they've had it for a year, with at least 70 to 75,000 back in their pocket with those savings. But also the convenience that they can just go and get things done locally is a big, big plus point for us. And I think that's the differentiator for Fika. That the self-charging is huge for us, and that's probably why he took it, because we don't have a swap system in Nakuru. But he's happily charging. We track his batteries. We monitor stuff with him. He's leased 2 batteries. So it's working very well, right? So that model shows that we are different to what others are providing. And
So
and they'll have their opinion as to why they're different to us.
yes.
And so they should.
So it almost sounds to me like what you're saying to me, that, in terms of your go-to market, first of all, I'm hearing insight was key, spending time with the riders, hearing what works for them, and having even somebody on your team who has that perspective, that context. And then the mere fact that the guy immediately saw the bike, the form factor, the parts on it, everything was familiar. It wasn't exotic or different. And the guy knew that if this cable goes down, I can probably go and retrofit or buy another one on the street. So it sounds to me like that insight piece is critical. And then the second thing is understanding the use cases, meaning you weren't exactly completely fearful of the guy going to Nakuru without your support here with battery swapping, and he was able to operate irrespective, right?
I think the plus point with him in this, and I use, excuse, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but the plus point with him was this: he actually invested some more time to understand the whole product. After even purchasing it, he had actually purchased it and then said, "I'm staying the night. Can I come to the warehouse tomorrow?" We're like, "Yeah, sure. Why?" So I just want to understand a bit more about EV. Like say something this happens and this trips or whatever.
He's thinking about all the angles, yeah.
And he is, and I think form factor is key. It's a bit like, when we grew up here, what were the 2 big motor vehicle brands that we were comfortable with? Nissan,
Motorcycles?
Datsun. No, I
Oh,
mean,
cars,
it's
yeah.
cars.
So it's
Toyota,
Nissan, yeah.
Toyota and a Nissan.
Yeah.
I remember that ad. Well, it was a Datsun, but under Nissan. Datsun is my car, Kenya is my country. I don't know if you remember that,
from the
right?
rally days and all
From
that.
the rally days, right? And those sort of things, it's amazing that we grow up with them, but if you actually apply them in your business, if you're buying a car, for example, yeah, we've now got other brands and the service support is there, but in those days they weren't. People relied on secondhand parts, for example, because that was a cheaper option, just to go and get secondhand parts. But where were they dominant in? Toyota and Nissan. Toyota was the dominant one, right? And still till today, you've got people saying, "I'll only buy a Toyota." It's my comfort
It's
level.
locked in, yeah.
But it's again because of the availability of parts, and that's how we develop this. Is that how easy is it to go and get things sorted? Border riders have it tough. Now imagine if he's got some complicated fender or some very unique design seat, and his seat is inevitably going to wear and tear in 9 months' time, a year's time. And now he needs to go, and he goes to the local market. He finds a seat, but now he can't just clip it on and he can't bolt it on. So he's now making Duakali modifications, which he'll end up
Retrofits,
doing.
yeah.
But why are you moving his cheese, so to speak? Why are you
Yeah.
moving his cheese, right? Just make their lives easier. They work hard. So keep it simple for them.
So coming back again to, a conversation I've had with others also in the EV space, is kind of trying to understand this commercial transit sort of passenger driven market and
Mm.
also deliveries, but the kind of like for like comparison in terms of what are the savings or benefits of going EV versus petrol. Of course, the obvious ones are things like emissions and likes, but what from a Fika perspective, what would you say are some of the key benefits that you've seen on the ground?
Look, I mean, today you've got a Boda rider who can charge our battery at the equivalent on his own token at 50 bob, right? And on average, that will give him at least 75 to 80 kilometers with load, and with not a lot of load. And again, it's hard to depict what Boda riders are going to do in the
Mm,
day, right? And even they couldn't tell you our day is always depicts this every day. Each day is different for them, right? And say they got more kilometers, which is great because they carried less load or they did shorter trips, but they were not carrying a lot of people. But now, at fuel at what, 211 shillings a liter, you equate that into it, they're nearly saving 65% just on petrol. Then there's the maintenance factor. What are you really saving on the EV? We are saving much more for border riders, and this is collectively as an EV, all EVs. The only things you're going to be changing are real hardware things: tires, brakes, the odd
mm.
cable that goes to the brake, you know, seats, wear and tear over the years to come. You're not doing engine oil filter changes and all this
Doesn't
gaskets.
exist
And
in
it
that,
doesn't
yeah.
exist anymore. The exhaust is going to blow and stuff. It's not emitting so much. So it's all that sort of stuff. So all that is a huge saving. That's another 30-40% saving for them. So like I said earlier, 70K, 75K a year easily back in your pocket. If you look at the top premium, and I won't mention the brand, the top premium ICE bike today is costing 180,000 shillings on the road. We're at 211. And if you put that into microfinance terms, yeah, there's a difference. But that saving is going to come back very quickly back into their pocket. And border riders are actually queuing up to say, right, we want this. They have some challenges. They have previous loans and stuff with microfinance, so it's not that quick for
With
them to come.
existing bikes,
Yes,
yeah.
and they'll mitigate that. At the end of the day, a border rider is an entrepreneur. Let's be straight, and they will see the benefit of that. You know,
So what I'm hearing you say is that, especially given the ridiculous cost of fuel these
mm,
days, that up to 60 and even more percent savings on a regular ice powered Boda Boda. That's what you're telling me.
yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
here's a funny thing. When I've spoken to others in your space, they tell me one of the biggest barriers to adoption is skepticism. People who should be buying them tend to be apprehensive, concerned, unbelieving of the benefits. How do you deal with that? Or maybe that's a different situation in your case.
Education is key. Education activations are key. The amount of time we've spent as
Hmm.
Fika with border associations, even through the initial research and going in there and saying, what bike do you want? And then they feel included, that we've helped develop this bike with you. And then when you're now going to go to market, you're now going back to them and saying, look, this is the bike for you. So they've understood this from pretty much base level, that we've organically built this with their input. So you've already built that trust. I'm going to throw it to a different business narrative. When we started waterless car washing in Dubai, there was a lot of apprehension in the malls. Um, a lot of people in the UAE who are Islamic, they believe that water is the way to clean and the more pure way to clean. And we were
Mm,
getting messages from people and people in the mall saying, this is haram. You cannot use a product which is not water to clean. And then when we educated them about the eco-friendly benefits and the savings, that adoption was
mm,
very quick. And it's the same way as you sit down with border riders and you just keep things simple. This is your fuel cost per liter. This is your X cost per battery. This is what you're going to save over time. This is your maintenance cost on the maintenance side. Yeah, there's a little bit more higher outlay because the price is a little higher on the microfinance you're going to pay per day, per week. But here are the savings. And any smart border guy, who I believe they're all smart because they're
hmm.
all entrepreneurs, as I said,
Yeah.
will see those benefits and say, right, and let's be honest, this has not just happened in the last 6 months. This has been happening for 2 years. And collectively, all e-mobility companies have been making the right, you could say noise, but you could say creating that correct perception of where this should be going. The government, for example, is also pushing EV now, right? In a huge factor. There's been changes to legislation around that.
Absolutely, especially the announcements recently after the climate conference. Yeah.
Yeah, but even prior to that, there was the announcements around, the importation, there's reduction in taxes. Yes, there's some compliance issues that we all need to meet, but that will happen, right? So those are positives. And trust me, we were all banging at the doors for years, 2, 3 years, saying we want these reductions. How can you bring an EV with a full tax implication on it? And this government is listening. But part of that, as I mentioned at the GA talk, was driven by the e-mobility association. My colleagues Moses and Hezbron and the others who really drove this agenda and said, look, this is what needs to be done, because other East African countries have done it, namely Rwanda.
Ethiopia, incredible, and Rwanda as well.
Rwanda was the first.
Yes,
it was the first to
and they've zero rated on the EVs,
I mean, if you go to West Africa, there's Togo's done it as well. So there's the time, like you said, is now, and we've got to act on it now. And we've got to show those benefits. Yes, if you go to a Boda rider and you talk to them about CO2 emissions and all that, and the health benefits, they'll get it. But at the end of the day, they want to see what's coming back in their pocket. What's in it for them, right? The why for them. What is their why for this? And that is where it comes out from.
So let me give you a hypothetical scenario. I'm a Boda Boda guy. I'm riding one of the ICE emission spewing, noisy bikes, and I'm like, I've seen one of your bikes running up and down. And I say, wow, I'd like one like that. So where would I start? How would I get one of yours?
You can contact Fika directly. You can go to our microfinance partners, for example, Mogo. Soon we'll be active with likes of Watu. We've already are to an extent. And you go to one of their showrooms. For example, with Mogo, you go out to one of their showrooms where Fika bikes are. And if you call us, we're more than likely to direct you there, because you would need microfinance, more than likely, 90% of the time, unless you're cash buy where you pay directly to us. And you would go to there, if you qualify under their microfinance, whatever their prerequisites are, whatever the number of months M-Pesa statements, guarantor, so on and so forth. You pay the deposit down, we get paid by the microfinancer, you then start your agreement with them, and then you pay us directly. And you have that long-term relationship with us on the battery lease, which also gives riders a comfort that it's not just, okay, now I'm just going to have to be on my own and I'm going to go out and swap batteries at your swap location.
Yeah.
But I have this one-on-one relationship still with Fika. We have riders coming over and they'll be like, this is going great, but, sometimes, yes, we have problems. We're not going to say we're pink perfect at the end of the day. And they'll come in and say, how do I fix this? And some of them are initially a little apprehensive of even fixing mechanical stuff, because they're scared that, I might trip a wire and do something on the electric side. So it's that comfort and relationship you give them. That's, you could say, after sales service support, So you'd go to one of the microfinancing companies and you can buy directly from us if it's cash. You can buy through our microfinancing partners, which is eventually, I would say, 95, if not more, percentage of where Boda riders will get their finance from.
Okay.
And that's growing, right? And microfinances are actually very aggressive now, obviously, in pushing EV, because that's going to be the next growth for them, right? ICE bike sales, let's be honest, have dropped tremendously for various reasons. High taxation on importation, fuel costs. It's huge.
It's massive.
Yeah, it's a huge change. I was actually speaking to a Boda rider who I knew on and off for about 6 months, about 6 months ago, and I knew him for 6 months. And he was one of our test riders. And he's about to purchase one now because his loan has come to an end and he's going to sell this bike on, or probably lease it on to a friend, which is what they do.
Oh, okay.
Right. And I was just asking him, I said, so how is business for you, like in Nairobi? And he said, really tough, because a lot of people aren't obviously using Bodas because, the price has gone up.
Wow.
And also the fuel costs have gone up. And he said, the amount of kilometers I was doing is also slightly reduced, Look, everything goes up. You're ordering some food off an app, even that price has gone up, right? So you're probably a bit more conscious about that. How much is your spend?
Correct.
This all has an impact on them at the bottom of the pyramid. At the end of the day, we forget that. If we're stopping on spend, imagine who it actually has an impact on. Think about it.
What about the future of electric bikes, especially, Boda Boda is now, let's say, rural, smaller towns in Kenya. Where do you think that's going? What does that look like? Especially given maybe some of the constraints they have there with access to electricity and the likes.
So I think, look, we've done some research out there. I'm not going to disclose exactly where, but we are hopefully within 3 months activating in 2 major cities outside of Nairobi.
Mm-hmm.
We've set up partnership agreements where we will put full-on swap centers, swap machines.
Okay.
And a number of those will be powered by solar.
Okay, fantastic.
Because, there is an issue of getting the accessibility of power. I think I might be wrong, correct me. I think we have sufficient amount of power in Kenya. It's the accessibility that's always the issue.
Correct.
Right. And yes, it's all clean, but again, in certain places, there is no accessibility. So you still need to go down the alternative use, which is, of course, with a full green of solar,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth. Interesting, one of those partnerships we have is with 2 small dukas,
Uh-huh.
Sort of slightly larger than your typical small kiosk. They are sort of dealers for a number of things, and we've already mapped out what solar panel size we need, backup battery, inverters and stuff we need with them, how many batteries we can store. And this actually came about from a very small 6 to 8 week trial that we did in that area with Bodas, picked up the GPS dynamics and said, right, this is the point. We approach this lady. And again, our model is creating this charging infrastructure with smaller entrepreneurial, you could say, business in a box style stuff, and saying, let them also earn from this, because that's where border riders hang out. If you go to rural areas, you don't always, hanging around petrol stations or outside of Navias or something like that again, or a Quick Mart. They might, but the reality is they're probably just hanging around. They create a stage or a Sacco around Sacco area stage, or near a stage, sorry, or a Sacco near to where they are. And you find locations within that,
to make it convenient to access.
Of course, I
and
mean, the end of the
likes.
day, look, gas stations, or as they're called now, energy stations, they've been built in mind with ICE vehicles. And yes, that's pretty conducive to borders, but that doesn't mean that's going to be conducive to EV borders. So it might be that EV borders can, petrol ICE bike borders can make it there because there's that, multiple stations. But sometimes in the real rural areas, you need to just have these swap stations, which is how we're trying to activate in these 2 cities. Small number of bikes, small number of stations, and see how it goes.
What about the concept of the partnerships? What partnerships have been critical to make this work?
Oh, I think they're critical. We've partnered with fulfillment companies like Little Cabs.
Okay.
I think we were one of their first, if not their first, e-mobility partner.
Okay.
We were leasing with them. And now riders are free to go after a good 18 months of leasing our bikes to go and free to purchase whichever bike they want. It doesn't have to be a Fika bike, but I, as a founder, am very comfortable with that because it's a nice feeling to see that we were part of that activation and education and adoption into EV. I think partnerships with, government, government now listening, the E-Mobility Association of Kenya, EMAC, reaching out to other stakeholders and speaking to people like EPRA,
Okay.
Where there's been a drive and reduction in, electricity rates for.
Yeah, I saw that in the media the other day.
Yeah, and also some implementation around new charging infrastructure rules. And I think partnerships with microfinancing companies.
That's critical, huh?
But that's the most critical. I mean, it's an ecosystem, right? You're a bike OEM, you're a bike manufacturer, assembler, whatever you call yourselves. And I'm saying because they're different facets of us. And then you need the sales channel, but who's going to finance the bikes for the Bodas? And they're critical in this. And I think they have also, but you've also got to understand it from their side. 2 years ago or 18 months ago, they can't finance bikes knowing that there's not been enough traction and how the battery performs and where's the data behind it. Because effectively, you're financing a bike and a border rider might not be able to function because of all issues relating to charging, performance, so on and so forth, because there's not enough data for them to do that. And suddenly they finance a bike, but he can't make the payments. So that's a default rate for them. And it
Yeah.
also gives a bad name for EV then. So I think that transition took time, but I think it's very buoyant now and active. And, several other partnerships, it could be with NGOs around education, partnering with border associations, chairmen of different groups,
Yeah.
participating. It was fantastic to see that we had ACS here. That was a huge, prior to ACS starting, we had a huge e-mobility parade. All the participants were together under an
I
EMAC
saw
or
that,
Rally
yeah.
E initiative with Tess. So that, those things matter. They create awareness. They create education. I see this as a partnership,
Yeah, it's a
right?
conversation.
It's a
We're
conversation,
trying to preach the gospel,
right? Will it get
Yeah.
out to 500 borders? Who knows? But that's also down to us and even others who may be competitors to say, let's get this out there, selfishly, because they may get more bikes on the road. We may get more bikes on the road, but this is a partnership. It's a conversation that leads to more education. And education is key. And I think that was said on the panel the other day.
Yes.
Look at what GA did. They had stakeholders from multiple partnerships,
Correct.
but they've created a product that has the blessing and the full approval of the regulator. More importantly, they also went down to this whole carbon neutral policy first and then created it. So it's not that they just woke up one day and said, let's just create an e-mobility eco-drive cover. There was a lot of thought and process
much
that
deeper.
went into it, and that shows that I think the time is now to move to electric. Whether it's just on Bodas or there's an opportunity to go into vans. There's multiple companies here doing buses, and that's fantastic. You see so many electric buses today,
Yeah,
and that's
it's
brilliant.
a thing for sure.
And one of our staff uses an electric bus every day to work.
Fantastic.
And they're like, this is fantastic. It's clean. It moves smoothly.
Yeah, I remember when I met the Basigo people
Yeah.
here in the studio,
Yeah.
and there's this whole concept of even the drivers love it. It's less stressful on them,
Yeah.
and when the passengers are on board, they can charge their phones and do other things. Like it's literally much more than your traditional bus. Actually, which brings me to my next point, which is when you think about mobility and where Fika is going, let's talk about your plans for global domination. Where are you going from here? We're Kenya right now. What's the plan going forward?
So, of course, the initial scale has to come from Kenya.
Yeah. Kenya is unique in that sense?
Yes, I think it is. And I think for Africa, and from what I know of a lot of the research that we did, is a lot of the ice bikes, when they launch a product here, they look at the launch in Kenya first for Africa. If it's adopted well and accepted here, it just shows that we like things perfect to a large extent. And then you move out to the rest of Africa. We are in discussions on different facets and models of our bikes and different ways of how we could collaborate with different partners, from Nigeria to Ghana to Rwanda, even Uganda. We have some of our version 1, I believe by end of this week, heading to Tanzania.
Okay.
Yes, they use bikes, but there's a use for them in a certain place in Tanzania. They're very committed to taking some there. So hopefully that will go through. So that just shows that we are spreading across. Interestingly, we've been working with some partners in Latin America already.
Wow.
Because they have a similar use case scenario for Bodas, or the equivalent of Bodas. And we have had some discussions with some people there, and it's gone into some commercial financial metrics
Nice.
already,
Okay.
where we may be able to support them with certain things around our bike and what we've built, because they've seen our product here. They like what they see. They like how we built it, and they have the similar way of doing local content there as well. So I don't know if it's a requirement. I haven't deep
Got no
dived into
details.
that. So there is definitely an opportunity. But why can't a Kenyan player dominate and now start sending bikes into India? Why do we always have to bring in bikes from India and
The
China?
recipients of
Why
it.
can't we do it the other way around? And that's the vision we have for Fika, or I have for Fika. But as a team, it's been organic, but now the scale is coming, and it's the pieces are coming together now. You know,
I'm delighted what you just said about, talking to people as far as South America, because, to me, best practices, we've seen that happen with mobile money and M-Pesa in Kenya. There is no reason why can't we be the innovators or the creators of the most viable product for a global market? I think that's incredibly exciting, if you ask me.
absolutely. And I think since the internet revolution, 20 plus years ago, and how dependent we are on it, we sort of sit here nowadays and say, "Oh, I need to look for this product because I think it's the next best thing since sliced bread
Hmm.
in a country, whatever country it is." And we immediately go to Google and think, "How can I bring this in?"
Mm,
How about thinking, "Yeah, that's what they do there, but how can I make it better for the country I really want to develop and grow it in?" And I think that's the ethos we came with, which was keep iterating at your product and making it perfect, and then get it out to the market. And then you will see that there is that interest from outside. And I
correct.
think M-Pesa is, of course, the biggest success story out of Kenya, and a wonderful success story. Remember being at Expo 2020 in Dubai last year. Was it the year before? Last year, yes. And um, the big thing at the Kenya Pavilion was the story of M-Pesa.
Mm,
That this is our, you could say our
our
poster
thing.
company.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Have there been any special moments or memories with Fika? Maybe one or two that come to mind where you really felt that impact. You really felt like this is going above and beyond, simply supplying an EV powered or electric powered bike, but rather the transformational impact of what it is that you brought to the market.
I think 3 weeks ago, or maybe a little over a month, we had a border rider come in at Mogo, purchased a bike, and 5 days later, he brought in a friend or a relative, and he also purchased a bike.
Wow.
But that happens. That's a great story. But the most beautiful thing was a little week over that, um, or a little longer actually. He, I saw him on the street,
Uh-huh.
on the road, not say the street, but on the road, and little close to Ruru where we operate from as Fika. And I stopped over and I said, "You got a Fika bike?" And he says, "Yes, I bought this 2 3 weeks ago. This is whatever 2 weeks ago or whatever." I said, "Great, how's it going?" And he went through the whole, "This is great. The savings are wonderful for me." And he had two kids on the back, so I thought maybe he's transporting two kids somewhere, right? I said, "Oh, so you're just transporting two kids?" He says, "No, today is Saturday," and it was a Saturday. It was afternoon. And I said, "Oh," so he said, "These are my kids." And he said, "They actually really love it. I'm able to take them on the bike because, it's cleaner. Yes, there's other ice pollution going on, but it's cleaner and they love it. And they love that it's quiet and it's not vibrating and it doesn't shake and
Mm.
it's a
It's a
smoother
smoother ride.
ride." A bit like what you said about,
The buses,
Basigo
yeah.
and the buses. And I actually thought to myself, wow, so he's been a border rider for, I don't know, 3 4 years. And he never really had this, his kids had this fear about getting onto,
Mm.
Papa or Daddy's actual work vehicle because it was you know, vibrating and not healthy, and they were scared and they were loving it. And that was a really nice sort of one that touched the heart, really,
Correct.
you know. And to me, it wasn't about the commercial side of it. Yes, he's saving money, and that's great for him because that's
Yes.
the intention. But the fact that he's just able to bomb around on a Saturday, take them somewhere, I don't know, wherever he was taking them, play football or whatever it was, on his bike because they wouldn't want to do it ordinarily, or they would, but there was that fear. Something special. It's really nice to see.
That's wonderful too. And I think the transformational aspects are how this is sort of enhancing lifestyles,
Mm.
but also to some extent enhancing the work as well. From what I'm gathering, once you have an EV border, I mean, generally it's just a much better experience, even from a commercial perspective, for the buyer or the investor in one of these. Rishi, thank you so much for joining for this podcast. And I think you've really shared a lot here. Wishing you all the best with Fika Mobility. And I can't wait to see, the next few years what you're going to accomplish. I'd love to hear a story like you're now in South America, North America, marketing this product. Maybe that'll be version 3.0, who knows?
Yeah.
But I think definitely one of the things I've gotten from this conversation is that you've understood the market, you've understood the context, you've created something that's relevant. And I think by all standards, possibly this should be the basis for success.
Well, Moses, thanks for having me. But in conclusion, I'd like to say this, that it's always been about know your customer, know your product and what product they want and how you're going to give it to them. And as soon as you've got that and you have a paying buyer, um, paying customer, you know you're on the right track. And I think Fika's slow but steady growth, um, given the product we've developed, has proven that model for us. But thank you so much for having me here today.
Great.
Thank you.
Good stuff. So thank you once again for joining us for the Pure Digital Passion podcast. We've had this electrifying conversation with Rishi from Fika Mobility, and we'll catch you in the next one.